Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Corey Center. I am the innovator here to make the world better. I do that by bringing together teams of experts to turn great ideas into revolutionary solutions for their industry. Today, I am here with my three favorite leaders, Linda Patton, Tony Thayer, and Terry Ann Richards. And we are talking about relationships, how relationships affect your leadership, how they can make you go in a couple of different directions if you're not careful, and why you want to be really mindful of how you nurture your relationships as a leader. So, Linda, will you please share a little bit about yourself and let our audience know why it's so important to nurture relationships as a leader?
Okay, I'm Linda Patton. I am a leadership mentor and trainer. I wrote the book, No One Stood Up When I Entered the Room, One Woman's Journey from Command to True Leadership, and coined the phrase confluential leadership, which is basically the blending of the masculine command with the feminine influence and creating a really powerful dance among the two and allowing the feminine to lead with the masculine supporting with organization structure and strategy. So that's who I am. Relationships are part of the influence side, the feminine side. The masculine has teams, and like football teams, basketball teams, soccer teams, and that's I find that's how they relate to each other. Women have friendships and girlfriends and guy friends, and they really can dig very deeply into relationships. What I find is that many leaders who are coming out of the command style don't know how to have a relationship. They just know it's a boss employee or boss consultant kind of relationship, and there's nothing very deep about it. It's very shallow. Yet when they discover the feminine side and go, oh, I have to have deeper relationships, they go all the way. And they want to know everything about your life and your experiences and your friendships and why are you like this, and they also want to share everything about them. It's like too much information, stuff I don't need to know, stuff I don't want to know about you. And then so you need the relationship, but you also need to have boundaries around what's enough. What do I really need to know and want to know about you in order to have a really great working relationship? I'm not going to date you for the most part.
Right.
Although I dated my husband, and never mind, we won't go there. And because what happens, and I'm talking too much. What happens is that you know so much about them, and they know a lot about you that the work doesn't get done. It's like, it's okay, Linda will take care of it, or whatever it might be. And when you have to have those tough conversations, it's virtually impossible to do because they go, you're my best friend. How can you have this conversation with me? So that's where the boundaries come in around what is a professional relationship. And I'm going to let somebody else answer that question.
That's great. And Tony, actually, I would love to hear a little bit more about you, and I would love for you to answer the question that Linda just posed.
Great. I'm Tony Thayer. I'm a leadership innovator who helps managers become drivers of the workplace, so that the workplace becomes a better place. I run a leadership dojo that lets 12 selected people come in for 6 months to really learn the essentials of leadership in their muscle memory. And this whole thing about relationships is a big part of that. One of the reasons I created the leadership dojo is to really let these 12 people who are in my program forge relationships that will last them their entire career. Because when you have somebody to sound ideas with, it lets you get things out of your head and make them tangible so that you can really make better decisions. And a big part of what I think of as essential to leadership is the distinction between doing, which is what most people think work is all about, and being. And when work can be a place of being, then people are more grounded and more in their intentions. And they're doing things because they want to do them, not because they have to do them. And so, relationship is where you recognize the place that other people come from. And you develop your own sense of that. So a big part of leadership for me is about getting people to understand who their workmates are. And that's really about values and it's about intentions. And I'll just sort of leave it at that for now, and we'll get into it more.
Awesome. Thank you, Tony. And Terry Ann, tell the audience a little bit more about who you are and why relationships and boundaries are so important as a leader.
So I am Terry Ann Richards. I'm from New Brunswick, Canada, a serial entrepreneur, and in the last 3 years have spent my time as a leadership development coach and business coach for entrepreneurs and leaders, mostly in North America. And I work on basically from the inside out. So I help entrepreneurs go and grow a profitable business, yes, but do so without sacrificing the life they love, right? Keeping at the center of who they are and why they decided to be an entrepreneur and a leader versus just focusing on the growth and forgetting everything else that's so near and dear to their heart. Relationships and boundaries. So they're important in all aspects of life. That's the reality of it, right? Relationships, the bonds you create with people, really dictates the level of success that you get to have both in business and in personal relationships, whether it's, teams like ourselves having, open and honest conversations or with, business partnerships and things like that. So, but I think, it all kind of comes down and stems from, if you ever heard of the 5 dysfunctions of a team, the basics being trust. You have to have trust. To Linda's point, you have to have that capacity and ability to be vulnerable, but you need to have your boundaries in place to know how vulnerable. Brene Brown talks a lot about vulnerability doesn't mean you go around telling everybody about your childhood traumas, right? You're being selective of who gets to have that level. There's almost like, if you think of like a little bubble that comes out from you, there are certain people who get to know more. And then there are certain people, especially in the professional space, where they get to know a little bit less, but they still need some because humans are wired for connection. We don't build relationships based on, Linda does this and Corey does this and Tony does this, and that's what they do. So I really, really like them. No, I'm more connected to you guys because of your why. Because of who you are. And the only reason I get to know your why is because we've asked questions and we've had these open and honest conversations back and forth. So that's how we're connected. And that's how leaders, what I would consider successful leaders, go to grow these really successful lives. It's by having good connections. But with connection, with building relationships, especially in the professional space, comes boundaries, right? You have to have boundaries both with yourself, right? And the way in which you run your day and you run your week, but the way in which you interact with other people. You don't want to be too intrusive. You don't want to give people too much information. So I know that we'll probably dive a little bit more into that, but relationships are important. And a lot of what I do is starting with, understanding personality types. Like there are, different types of people, different ways in which we enjoy being interacted with, right? I have a certain way that I really enjoy being interacted with. And if you come at me from the opposite way, which is more potentially your way, then I may not react the way that you would have hoped that I react. So I think another side of leadership and relationships is becoming hyper aware, more cognizant of how other people like to be interacted with, right? And there's all sorts of, there's Myers-Briggs and there's personnel dimensions and DISC, and I'm sure there's a bunch of endless, right? So, pick your poison, pick which one, but then start to discover, because after you kind of delve into it, then you can start to look at people and be like, hey, that's how they like to, they need more facts, right? Whereas like someone like me, I'm more in the like, I like fun, but I'm heart centered. So if you come at me from the soft heart centered, you got me. If you come at me from the hard facts, I'm like, I'm out. It's too much, right?
Totally.
Yeah. So same as Linda, I feel like I just talked way too much, so I pass it back to you.
Awesome.
And the ball is yours.
So yeah, so it seems like one of the big things with relationships is establishing connection and getting real with your people, so everyone can actually know where one another stands, right? Because if we don't have that, then we have this kind of like, oh, I don't know what I can share, I don't know what I can do, and people feel like they're walking on eggshells, nothing gets done. right? Because people are too afraid to ask questions because they don't know how people are going to react. That being said, it leads me to an interesting curiosity, Linda. And that's when boundaries are too rigid. What tends to happen in that situation?
Ooh, well, I can tell you that my mom told me when I was a young girl, yes, I was one once upon a time, that you needed to build your walls high, strong, thick, and have very little arrow slits that you could peek out of because people would stab you in the back and it wasn't safe out there. So I had very strong boundaries. I mean, they were several feet thick, and it made it very difficult for people to get to know me. I wasn't willing to share anything. I wasn't willing to open up. I wasn't in my heart. And it made it very difficult for people to work with me in an entrepreneurial way. Now, needless to say, in the military, it didn't matter. You really didn't want anybody to know a whole lot about you. And part of that is because of the hierarchy. I mean, you didn't tell your sergeant your deep, dark secrets. That just wasn't done. You might share it with another lieutenant. You also didn't share up. So you had a very narrow band of where you could share. And so you didn't share that much. You didn't give of your heart in that particular situation. What makes it difficult is when you do get into an arena where, I don't want to say having soft boundaries, but having clear boundaries that allow people, there are ways to get in. There are ways to ask questions to get in. There's ways where the relationship deepens and you open those boundaries just a little bit more. That was difficult for me. And it took me many years to get to a place where I felt safe to let the walls drop and to become more transparent. It did, as I say in so many places, it caused my team to go running in the night, and it caused my clients to go, I'm done. You know, I can't work with someone like you. And that's exactly what they would say to me. It's like, well, what did I do? Well, you're very competent. You're very experienced, but I don't feel that there's any heart, any feeling, you just want to tell me what to do. And I'm not that person. So I learned to ask questions and to be curious.
Awesome. Questions and curiosity are key to relationships. I can appreciate that. And to finding the right boundaries, it sounds like.
Exactly.
Not too thick, not too thin, somewhere in that Goldilocks region. Right?
Yeah, I thank Goldilocks for so many metaphors. She was wonderful.
Right. It is, yes, totally. I'm going to digress because I could go on for days. I have a 5-year-old, so I could literally go on for days about that metaphor.
Yes.
And Tony, I'm really curious when it comes to relationships. I'm curious about relationships between team members, how you create the right boundaries within the team themselves, not necessarily from the leader down, but you've done a lot with culture and climate and really creating that aspect. Curious what you can tell us about that dynamic.
Yeah, thank you, Corey. You're queuing me up well. The whole thing about work climates is a notion I have that's separate from work cultures, because usually the culture is a business-wide thing, but if you're a leader of a team, you can set your own climate. And one of the big elements of setting a climate is letting people be who they are and being able to expose that. So kind of letting down the boundaries. And I'm of an era, I think, in concert with Linda, where I think everybody had big walls up around them when I was coming into the workforce. I certainly did. And what I really like to emphasize now is just the sense of nurturing an environment where people can open up, feel safe, feel they belong, and have some assurance that mistakes are learning opportunities, not reasons to be castigated. And I have
Awesome.
a little 5-part thing I call STEAM, which is just the letters of the word, that if a leader is nurturing his team instead of his own ego, then it's really about how are they doing? How safe are they? What kind of relationships can they forge? And that's really about, do they feel safe? Do they trust me and trust one another? How's the energy? I mean, that's just like a meter that you can be reading along with your accomplishments, and moving that needle. And the sense of acceptance, because when people feel like they belong, I think that's one of the deep uh, neurological needs of humans. Is we are wired to tribe. Birds flock and people tribe. And
Mhm.
except that in the workplace, people don't tribe. It's all about the ego of the CEO or the objective of the industry, and everybody showing that they can get on board. But it's not about them. It's about giving themselves up to be part of that. So to me, relationships and work are really critical. It's like in the military, the leaders say leaders eat last, because when they go into the mess hall, they want to make sure that their people all get fed, and that's just an attentiveness that creates trust. And the final aspect of STEAM is meaning, and there's nothing more meaningful to people than feeling like they matter, and that's the
Right.
essence of a relationship.
Can I dispel a myth that leaders eat last in the military because they want their people to eat first? It's also because you hang on to the best rations in the pot.
Oh, I didn't know that part.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, we used to dish out sea rations, which you heat in a pot of boiling water. And we knew which ones were really bad and we knew which ones were really good. And it was surprisingly, it was the beans and weenies that were the best. And the worst was the green eggs and ham, and they were really green. And so, you would choose for the troops who were going through, and if you didn't like somebody, you gave them the green eggs and ham. And you always made sure that there was a beans and weenies there for you. So yes, you do eat last, so they do get fed, but you also check the reaction of what everybody's eating and how it's going. Sorry, bust your myth.
Well, it's a
I
fairy
like
tale. We're back to Goldilocks.
Yes, back to
Right.
Goldilocks. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Ms. Terry, and I'm really curious, since you've been more in the entrepreneurial world, when boundaries are crossed, either by a client or team member toward you or the other way, how do you handle that in a way that maintains the relationship?
Sorry, my hair is like doing something random. It's this earpiece or headpiece, whatever you
Right.
call it. Okay, so how do you handle when boundaries are crossed? Is that that's the
Mhm.
question? Okay, so I think each situation is different. I think if I were to say what I naturally would do, is I feel when and I would like. That is like my conflict resolution tactic in all situations with my children, with my partner, with anybody I'm in business with. I feel hurt. I feel frustrated when you drink bubbly on camera. And I would like if you put your bubbly away when we're on camera, right? I think at the end of the day, boundaries get crossed all the time, right? Because the
Totally.
reality is your boundaries are different than mine, and mine are different than Linda's, and Linda's are different than Tony's, right? And it's
Absolutely.
really difficult because, we're not walking around with like hula hoops around us. So none of us really know where our boundaries like start and begin. And I think the perfect way that I could put that into an example is if you've ever been around, well, it's COVID right now, but if you've ever been around a close talker and like somebody who talks really close to you and you're just like you just keep backing up, right? And I apologize to any of you that are watching right now and you're a close talker. Like we love you, but there is a invisible hula hoop going around me that says this is my bubble, this is my boundary, right? But you can't see it. So I need to be able to verbalize it. You can't be mad at the person, right? You can't be
Right.
mad at people when they cross your boundary if you've not at least let them know what that boundary is. So I think first and foremost is you have to have, again, going back to that 5 dysfunctions of a team, the basics of trust. Well, the next level is trust enough to have conflict, right? And everybody's afraid
Right.
of conflict, right? I won't say everybody, but like a really large percentage of the population thinks conflict is a bad thing. Conflict in business, conflict in teams is super awesome, right? Because
We're getting somewhere.
somebody has this expectation and the other person's completely oblivious to this expectation because it wasn't clearly identified or nobody thought to have that conversation. And now all of a sudden you have that conversation where somebody says, "Hey, you've popped a bubble and you've gone through my boundaries or you haven't met this." And so I feel when this happens and I would like. And it gives the other person the opportunity to be like, oh, didn't know that, or didn't
Right.
understand that boundary, or had no idea what that expectation was. And
Hmm.
no, not always in leadership and entrepreneurship does everyone agree. That's not like
Right.
normal, right? But it does give the other person an opportunity to be like, okay, now I get it, right? I see it from your angle, I see it from your perspective, and now I have the decision, the choice, right? That's the beauty of being a human, is we have choices to change, to stay the same, or to, I hate the word compromise because that sounds like nobody's winning, but like to iterate, to find a
Hmm.
balance that kind of works for everybody involved, right? And that, to me, is that's how you keep and build relationships, right? It's, I had a mentor of
Totally.
mine many years ago say to me, like, you need to build more bridges than you burn. And the
Hmm.
reality is, the only bridges that you usually burn are the ones that you didn't give the opportunity to be fixed, right? You didn't do the I feel when and would like. Again, if I don't know what you want, Corey, if I don't know that I've crossed your boundaries, you're just going to sit over there and steam, right? You're going to be pissed off. You're going to be frustrated with me and be like, how the hell is she doing X, Y, and Z when I want this? But I'm sitting over here in my little dovetail corner thinking everything's fine, right?
Right.
Because I don't know, because you haven't had that conversation with me. So the moment you tell me, then I have a decision to make. And it might not
Totally.
be the decision you want, but at least I've been given the power of knowledge. That's why they say knowledge is power, the power of knowledge to then make a decision that then is aligned with me as a leader, and all of that. So hopefully that answers your question.
Totally. So it really sounds like a lot of that is, one, don't assume that people know that they've crossed your boundaries, because most
Yeah.
of the time they don't.
Yeah.
And by reacting very strongly, chances are there's going to be unnecessary conflict when there
Mhm.
could just be a simple conversation. Hey, this expectation wasn't met. Hey, this boundary was crossed.
Yeah.
Here's how I feel. Here's what I would like to happen.
Mhm.
And that may not solve the whole thing, but that's the start of a conversation. And it's not the start of an argument, right? So we get to share, because this is my perspective, how I feel, the fact of what actually happened. No kind of, this childhood trauma thing that happened to me plays out in this way and this thing happened. None of that. I feel this way when this happened. Please do this instead.
Yeah. And can I add to that? I think the reality of it is in conflict, we get sometimes in a space where we have we have a conflict, we have a conversation, and we think the outcome is going to be X, Y, and Z. But sometimes there's a better, like, ABC, right?
Hmm.
Like, again,
Totally.
expectations are just there based on past experiences, right? Like, we think this is what it's supposed to be. Sometimes there's a better way. I think the saying
Hmm.
is, like, there's more than a few roads to Rome. So you do have to be, you have to be comfortable in having, constructive conflict. Conflict is not a bad thing, and you need to have the ability to be able to express what you're thinking and what you're feeling. Because here's the deal:
Yep.
I can argue your thoughts and opinions, right? We can have a
Hmm.
debate about that. I can't argue your feelings, right? Like,
Totally.
so feelings are just feelings. There's no book that I can say, well, actually, what you should be feeling is this, right? Like, I can't do
Right.
that. I can maybe say your opinion is wrong, and we can, we do this all the time. People get in arguments over opinions every day: politics, religion, sex, and rock and roll. Don't talk about it, right?
Right.
but in terms of, I feel sad, I feel frustrated, I feel angry, I feel neglected. You can't argue that. And so it's really easy to point the finger and go, you
Oh,
did
yeah.
this and you didn't do that. And I think that's where, natural humans get their back up against the wall. It's like putting a rat in a corner, and we go into attack mode, and we defend ourselves. No, I didn't. You did this. And actually, the reason I did this is because last year at band camp, you did X, Y, and Z, right? And so I'm still holding a grudge. But if you
Right.
say, I feel, I can't argue it, because it's just a feeling. And then maybe what you're feeling is based on an assumption that I can help to clarify, right? So feelings are a good place to start. A lot of people don't want to keep it, put it in business, and they think it doesn't have a place in leadership. But, like, we're humans, we all have feelings, and we try to hide them, through putting maybe those thick walls up. But the reality is feelings, if you can express them in an appropriate way, are a really good way to build strong bonds and connection in a workforce, in a team. Yep.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. So before we close today, I would love to hear parting thoughts, any tip, tools, techniques, or anything that you, lovely leaders of mine, would like to share with our audience before we leave? So Linda, any parting thoughts for our audience before we wrap up today?
I love what Terry Ann said about feeling and being open and honest about that. You're right. You can't argue with somebody's feelings, and that, as Tony knows, that it's your thoughts that generate those feelings, and then you have actions and results. And so if you can express what those feelings are, then it's possible to change those actions and the results that you're getting from it. So I agree with you so wholeheartedly that that's the place that we need to come from when we're having a conversation, especially a difficult conversation with someone about performance or about how they're interacting with the team or whatever it might be. When you can go from that part, you have a better chance of getting a solution that will bring the team together and become more high performing.
Awesome, thank you. So sharing your feelings, not manipulating with your feelings. It's not like I feel this way and you need to change it. No, we are the only one responsible for our feelings. But being able to share, like, hey, this is what's really going on for me. It gives everybody else permission to feel and lets them know where you're at so that all of you can take action on the same page. So thank you for that, Linda. And Tony, any parting thoughts for the audience about relationships or boundaries?
Yeah, I love that Terry Ann tagged out conflict, because we're talking about feelings. That's the acid test. If you can talk about feelings, well, that can be just a really easy kind of intention that doesn't mean a lot because it's not real. But when it actually includes conflict, and people are encouraged to get into conflict, and behind every conflict is a breakdown in values. We think we're on the same page, and all of a sudden we aren't. And somebody feels upset about that because you're dealing with something that they value, and your interpretation isn't in line with their value. So when you get into doing that, then that's what really helps people feel like they belong, because they understand each other and they can really express what's real for them, and they can understand what's real for the people around them. But I'd offer the counterpoint that as great as feelings being expressed are and being a part of the environment, the flip side of that is intentions, because feelings are what we want to move away from when we're in conflict or it's a bad feeling. But intention is what we're all about, where we want to go. And when you can share that as well, then it really helps people understand why your value is being violated and why you have boundaries about things. And but I think it's been a great discussion, and all these things are really important to leadership.
Totally. One of my favorite things to do based on what you're saying is, when noticing a conflict and listening, right? Letting somebody share, like, hey, this is how I feel, and this is what's going on, and this is how I interpreted what you did. My immediate response is almost always the same. Wow, thank you for sharing that with me. That was not my intention. I was doing this. I was intending for this to happen. And that almost always diffuses the situation, right? Because now we see, like, oh, you actually had my best interest in mind. I just couldn't see it because I was coming to it from this space. And it almost always, we can find a resolution in that. So thank you, Tony. And Terry Ann, any parting thoughts for our audience today?
I think I'm just gonna tag on to, we're all playing tag here. Tag it on to what you just said, Corey. I think as a leader or somebody in a position of leadership, and there are moments where conflict arises, I think, and Tony kind of alluded to it too, it's really separating what you think happened and the intentions of the human, right? Because I think we all have an ability to frustrate people and piss people off, and to do things that are potentially out of alignment with the team's expectations, but then you always got to take a step back and look at the person, right? Like, is that really their intention, right? Like, I'm a firm believer, like, I'm a glass half full kind of girl, so I believe 99.9% of the population, they're good people, right? They are not intending to harm, hurt, frustrate people. They're not out to do that, but they still do it, right? But it wasn't their intention to do that. And I think when I think of, when I've had, teams that I've been leading, and, a staff does something and you're pretty frustrated with them, I have to separate myself from the fact that, I know this person, and I know that that's not their intention. So then I'm having a different type of conversation than if I would have walked in with like, you did this and you did it because we create stories in our head when there's conflict,
Oh, of
right? So
course, we're meaning making
so
machines.
yeah, we really are. So I think, kind of again, taking on to what you and Tony just said, like there is a difference when you can separate in conflict what someone's probably their intention was versus the story you have in your head, right? Yeah.
Totally. Thank you. There's one tip I want to share to be able to stay in that mindset. Something that I learned a few years back that stayed with me. And that's just remember, like no matter who you run into, wherever you run into them, everyone's doing their best. So when you feel or see that team member that's really in a poor mood or something, like they're really reacting to everything, if they're doing their best, something else is going on. So by stepping in and asking questions like, hey, seems like something's going on. You want to come, just let me know what's up, how you're doing, how I can help. That kind of relationship, you're not violating any boundaries. I noticed that it seems like X. Would you like to talk? I would love to support you. Right? So we can always create those connections and those links so that people feel valued on the team. And if they feel valued on the team, your customers are going to feel valued by them. So everybody wins. So focus on relationships and boundaries. And if you really want to go deep into it, join us at the beginning of January for the Awaken Leader training, where we will go into all of the tips, tools, nuances, all the ways to work with it in a practical environment. So we can actually take it back to our teams and implement it in a way that is really going to work to create a high-performing team. Thank you, Linda, Tony, and Terry Ann for being here today. It's always a pleasure to come together with you. And let's do it again next week.
Thank you, Corey.